welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping straight into, well, a really fascinating stack of material today. It's all focused on Abraham's spiritual journey.
That's right. Specifically, we're looking at an analysis of his trials, from the early parts of Genesis, starting with Parashat Lekh Lekha.
And the question our sources throw up is,
Hmm.
it's a real puzzle. Honestly, it feels completely counterintuitive.
Hmm.
How is the simple command, Lekh Lekha, go forth, basically pack up and move, how is that considered a more serious, a more profound spiritual test than Abraham being willing to, well, die in a fiery furnace?
It seems totally backwards, doesn't it? Especially when you think about Abraham's track record up to that point.
Right.
I mean, we know from the Midrash, from tradition, that he'd already faced Ur Kasdim, that incredibly dramatic test.
Yeah, that's the fiery furnace.
Exactly. Choosing potential martyrdom over idol worship.
Yeah.
He literally risked his life and was saved. He was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice.
And then pretty soon after that, God tells him, okay, leave your land, your birthplace, your father's house. Go where I show you. And crucially, God promises him just enormous rewards.
Huge rewards. Nationhood, greatness, guaranteed blessings. Sounds like, the best deal ever on the surface.
It really does. A command backed by the highest possible return on investment, you could say.
Exactly. And you contrast that command, Lekh Lekha, with, say, the later Akeda, the binding of Isaac.
Which is just devastating.
Utterly devastating, and with no promises attached, just this crushing demand. But our sources argue that this initial command, just to move, is actually a higher level of spiritual challenge than even facing the furnace.
So that's our core mission for this deep dive then, to understand why.
That's it. We need to frame this exploration around the idea that these trials, they ascend not really in physical toughness, but in spiritual challenge.
Driving us towards this concept the sources call nullifying the why.
Okay, so let's start right there with that comparison. How could moving house something millions of people do, right? How could that possibly be a bigger test than staring death in the face?
It just feels absurd when you put it like that. It's like telling someone who survived, I don't know, a plane crash, well done. Now for the real test, are you willing to switch phone plans?
Right. The physical stakes seem completely incomparable.
Yeah.
But, and this is the key, the spiritual stakes are entirely different. What's really fascinating here is that facing that kind of physical devastation, like martyrdom and Ur Kasdim, it actually provides something crucial.
Which is?
Absolute spiritual clarity.
Okay, unpack that for us. Spiritual clarity in the face of death.
Well, think about the mindset. Imagine someone facing death for their deepest conviction.
Okay.
When you're asked to make that ultimate sacrifice for a clear principle like, say, God's name, or standing against idolatry, you have this immense inner certainty. You know exactly why you're doing it, why you're suffering.
Ah, I see. Your purpose and the action, the suffering, they're perfectly aligned.
Perfectly. The spiritual justification is sky high. The greater the physical suffering may be, the clearer and stronger that justification feels inside. You know what you're dying for.
And that knowledge, paradoxically, it almost acts like a shield. Against doubt, maybe? Despair?
You could say that. The why is unshakable. It gives immense strength, even in the face of annihilation.
Okay, so that's the critical distinction then. Martyrdom. Physically terrible, yes, but spiritually clear, compelling justification.
Precisely. But the spiritual challenge, our sources argue, it ramps up dramatically when that clear, compelling justification is taken away.
And that brings us right back to Lekh Lekha.
Yep.
If the furnace gave certainty, what happens when God asks Abraham to do something that, well, that just seems arbitrary,
Right.
without that spiritual high?
Exactly. The core difficulty of Lekh Lekha, it's not the schlepping across the desert, it's not the physical effort.
No.
It's receiving a command that seems to lack any inherent justification or, rational reason from Abraham's perspective. He's already serving God where he is, in Haran. His life is set up.
Yeah, you'd think, why can't I just keep doing my good work right here? What's wrong with Haran? Or, if he lived today, why not Brooklyn? Why move?
What's intrinsically wrong with staying put? If I were Abraham, I'd be thinking, look, my mission is spreading monotheism. I can do that perfectly well from here, from my established base.
It seems redundant, doesn't it? From a purely practical standpoint, why fix what isn't broken?
And this is where stepping back and thinking about, say, modern emigration is kind of helpful.
How so?
Well, most people today, when they emigrate, they usually have a rational, explainable reason, right? They're chasing something. Maybe better jobs, maybe freedom, safety, opportunity.
Often uncertain things, though. Maybes, perhapses.
Right. Uncertain maybes and perhapses of prosperity or a better life. They move based on some calculation, some hope of an improved outcome. They have a logical reason, even if it's a gamble to endure the hardship of moving.
Okay, so they're acting on rational hope for some kind of tangible reward or improvement.
But Abraham's situation is flipped. He's asked to leave with complete certainty of blessing. God guarantees the reward, huge rewards.
Right, the nationhood, the greatness.
All guaranteed.
Yeah.
But he has absolutely no understanding of why the physical move itself is essential for his spiritual service or for receiving that blessing. The challenge isn't the difficulty of the task, it's the spiritual demand. Act solely because you were commanded, even when you don't grasp the necessity, even when it makes no logical sense to you.
Well, wait a second. Doesn't the guarantee of becoming a great nation, doesn't that become the rational justification? If God says, move and you get all this amazing stuff, isn't Abraham moving for the amazing stuff?
That's a great question, and it gets right to the heart of it.
Why is accepting a massive guaranteed gift so spiritually tough?
Because, and this is the deepest insight from the analysis we're looking at, if Abraham moves primarily for the guaranteed reward, then he's still operating based on a logical calculation, a very good one, maybe the best possible calculation. But it's still calculation. Self-interest, in a way. The test, arguably, is whether he can subordinate his own logic, his own calculation of benefit, entirely to the commander's will. Can he obey just because God said so?
I think I'm getting it. So the test is designed to kind of isolate the act of obedience itself, to separate it from the allure of the reward.
Yes.
The guaranteed reward is almost like a complication, a distraction, tempting him to find an internal personal why based on the benefit.
You definitely see it that way. Correct. The true trial, according to this view, is the spiritual act of nullifying the why.
Nullifying the why.
It's that moment where Abraham has to essentially renounce his own need for a logical internal justification that makes sense to him. He has to accept God's kingship, God's command, without needing that inner reason or purpose.
Wow. That implies a pretty fundamental shift inside him, doesn't it? He's not just moving his belongings, he's having to move the entire internal structure of how he makes decisions.
Absolutely. It's not just about geography, it's about psychology, it's about faith. The test requires him to change himself fundamentally, to follow a command that, from his limited perspective, might make no practical sense.
He has to act despite the lack of explanation.
Yes, this is where faith really transcends rational calculation. He's challenged to let go of that intellectual control, that need to have it all add up logically for him, to accept that the reason might be entirely transcendent beyond his grasp.
So the ultimate spiritual test isn't necessarily the big, dramatic physical sacrifice, which actually kind of validates your own internal principles and strength.
Right, like in martyrdom.
But maybe it's the surrender of intellectual autonomy, the surrender of the right to demand, why should I bother doing this?
That's the absolute crux of it. Faith reaches its deepest, maybe most challenging point when the blessing itself, the guaranteed reward, becomes part of the spiritual test.
How so?
Because you're no longer acting for the outcome in a simple transactional way. You're being asked to act simply because you were commanded, separating your action entirely from your own logical need for purpose or benefit.
And boy, does that slam right into our modern sensibilities.
Doesn't it just?
We live in an age that just hyper-values autonomy, rational decision-making, and maybe above all, finding your why for absolutely everything we do.
Everything. Career choices, diets, hobbies, relationships.
Everything needs a clear personal justification. It has to have visible personal meaning for us.
That tension is just profound. I mean, think about it. There are entire industries built around helping people find their personal purpose, their internal why, to drive their action.
Self-help, coaching.
Exactly. And now here we have Abraham, literally the father of faith for multiple traditions, being asked, according to this interpretation, to explicitly discard his personal why and act purely based on command.
So how do we in this hyper-rational autonomous age even begin to process a trial like Abraham's, acting without justification?
It's tough. We have this almost intrinsic resistance to anything that feels arbitrary or, pointless by our own logic.
Yeah, if a task at work, or maybe a traditional observance, or even a family obligation lacks clear personal meaning to us, we feel totally justified in pushing back, questioning it, trying to reframe it, or even just ignore it.
And this really brings up some critical questions about adherence, about commitment in contemporary life, doesn't it? If an action is required maybe by tradition, by faith, by a social contract, or whatever, but the reasoning isn't clear or it seems inefficient, Think about dealing with bureaucracy sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Our immediate instinct is to rationalize it, streamline it, or just find a way around it if we can't see the point.
So going back to Abraham, the command is move, the reward is guaranteed. My rational brain says, great deal, let's pack. But the spiritual difficulty, you're saying, lies in accepting that even if he stayed, maybe had the same faith, the same convictions, he wouldn't get the blessing.
Possibly. Because the arbitrary command itself, the act of relocation, for no reason he understood, that was the core test of accepting God's sovereignty.
Okay. It's not really about where he lives. It's about who gets to decide where he lives.
Exactly. The source material strongly suggests that true faith sometimes demands we act despite our deep-seated need to understand. It requires us to acknowledge that some purposes, some reasons, are simply beyond our pay grade, beyond our comprehension.
Which leads to the question, can faith, real deep faith, coexist with this constant modern demand for explanation for everything?
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
And it forces us to confront the potential value of,
Yeah.
well, of non-justifiable action. Is there still spiritual growth possible in doing something simply because it's commanded or required, even when the logic totally escapes us?
It really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from the purpose of the task itself and onto the relationship with the one who commanded it.
Beautifully put. When you act without needing that personal justification, you are, in effect, elevating the authority of the commander, whether that's God or tradition or a principle, above your own intellect, your own need for control.
And that surrender of logical control, spiritually, that's way harder, arguably, than physical suffering.
Because it challenges our fundamental desire for self-determination, for autonomy, for being the one who calls the shots based on our own reasoning.
Wow. So this deep dive into Lekh Lekha, it really reveals a pretty powerful truth, doesn't it? That maybe the greatest spiritual challenges aren't always found in those big, traumatic, physically sacrificial moments.
Like facing death, which, as we said, can validate our internal strength and clarity.
Right. But maybe the biggest challenges are hidden in the mundane, in the simple commands that seem illogical, that demand we surrender our most prized possession, our need for logical control and personal justification, our need to always know why.
And if that's true, if the spiritual challenge increases as our need for justification decreases, well then we really have to look closely at our own lives, at our own resistances to the small, maybe inexplicable demands or routines or changes. So maybe we can leave you, the listener, with this thought to mull over. What relatively easy or simple change, maybe in your routine, your commitments, perhaps your behavior, something you currently resist, maybe just because you can't logically justify the reason, you can't quite grasp the ultimate purpose behind it.
Yeah.
Could that thing, that seemingly small, illogical thing you're pushing back against, could that actually be your deepest, most challenging spiritual test right now? Something to think about.